Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be continuing our Lightwave to Unreal Engine series. This is going to be part 2 of our materials videos. In this video, we're going to jump right in and start texturing, or bringing our textures into our materials, plugging them in, and then I'm going to start talking somewhat extensively about what's called a master material pipeline, using material instances within Unreal Engine. It makes things seem more complicated up until the point where you actually have to do a lot of repetitive work. Master material pipeline helps reduce repeat work, like doing the same task over and over again, like loading textures in and plugging them in and going to the next one and what have you. So without further ado, let's get going. Oops. Let's go ahead and grab our textures. All we really care about are the robot head textures, and we have 4 of them for each material. So let's grab our color texture here, plug that in there. We need our metallic texture, plug that in there. Need our roughness texture, plug that into the roughness input, and then finally our normal map texture, and plug that in there. So let's go ahead and before I hit apply, let's go ahead and drop our mesh into the world. And just kind of zoom in on his face here a little bit, and we're going to hit apply. And what you're going to see here is initially this white material is going to go away, and you're going to see this grid texture. Now, the grid is all at kind of weird angles because that's the way the UV is, but because I painted this head in Substance Painter, and granted it doesn't look the best because this was like the first time I'd ever textured anything in Substance Painter. I've subsequently retextured this thing like 5 times, so the current version looks a lot better, but this is the one I had on hand when I just did a quick search. Anyway, now that the material is applied, and you know, you would think, okay, it's time to move on. Let's do the next part. Do we do the same thing? Do we, you know, open up the material, say for the torso, for example, wherever that is, and do the same thing? Open that up, drag textures in. No, that's not how we're going to do it, and the reason why we're not going to do it that way is that's the way they would expect us to. No, it's because Unreal Engine has something called material instances, and for something simple like this, you'd probably argue, well, it's not really a big deal, you know, how I do that, as long as I just, you know, plug things in and everything's the same because I, you know, textured everything in Substance Painter, everything should look the same. And yeah, okay, that's a fair argument, but we're going to take things a little bit further, and this is really just for example purposes. You know, I talked about what do you call it, post-process materials earlier in the previous video, and so what I'm going to do is something that we probably would have done in the regular material in Unreal Engine 3, but in Unreal Engine 4 we have post-process materials, and so this specific thing is not something I would do normally within the regular material editor, however, or I should say the material for the head. However, the example is really that we're adding additional functionality, and it's kind of like a quick thing to do, versus doing something like, you know, having snow automatically grow on the top of, you know, the head or something like that. Basically, the idea is we're going to be adding features to these materials, and then having them kind of populate down through the hierarchies of materials as we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on our head material, and I'm going to create a material instance, and I'm going to leave this one, and as instead of having this material plugged into the robot, I'm going to actually plug this one in. So let me go ahead and open up our character mesh. You can see here we have our character. Let's go back into our materials. We're going to select our material instance and we're going to plug him in there. Okay, so now this material can be renamed, and we're just going to call this robot master. And let's save everything. Just like in Lightwave, save often. Although I generally don't have a problem with Unreal Engine crashing, so but you know, it does happen from time to time, so it's a good idea just to save. Okay, so we have our head material instance. Let's go ahead and open that up. You'll see that the interface looks completely different. This is actually a good thing because we're not going to be plugging nodes in, you know, to stuff. Everything is basically, you know, plugged in. What we do want to do, however, though, is that we want to expose anything we might want to change in our instances via our master material. So let's go ahead and I'm going to select all these texture samples. I'm going to right click and I'm going to convert them all to parameters. Alright, and so as you can see, it's given all the texture samples a name. Param basically means parameter, and then the underscore, and then there's a number. Well, we can change that name to be whatever we want. So let's go ahead into our details panel. We can also do it at the top here, but do it in our details panel. And we're going to call this color. Metallic. Roughness. And of course, you've guessed it, normal. There we go. Okay. So we're just going to go ahead and hit apply on that. It's going to take a moment to apply those changes. Save the asset. Alright, now if we go back to our material instance, you can see that now we have the ability to access our individual textures, and we can actually replace these textures here. However, because we have this head material instance plugged into the head, changing these right now isn't going to really get us anything. If you were, say, going to do like a game or any kind of project where you're using this pipeline, your master material probably wouldn't have any kind of textures in it at all. You know, you could reset all these things back to box, and it back to box is an expression that comes from the day school about resetting everything to its defaults, or you know, starting over from scratch type of thing, right? So you know, you could set all these so it's not actually pulling any textures, but your material instance would actually still have all the textures as long as these override checks were marked. All right, so let's go ahead and this time we're going to create a material instance of our instance. And this is kind of important here because now we're establishing a hierarchy, right? So it's not just we have a master material and a child. We have a master material, a material instance that's just the head, because now we're defining like the class that is our character, right? You don't have to, you could generate the instance from the master again. However, because we're, say you had like 5 different of these robots and you wanted each robot to have a slightly different color to it. All right. So you could set up the ability in the master material to change the color, but then go into the head instance, change the color, and that color would change for that particular robot. You have the next set where you have a new chain, change that color in the head. Say the first one's blue, the next one's orange, the one after that's red or green or whatever. All right, now you have the ability to have different hierarchies that all descend from the same master material. And so that's kind of what we're going to do here. So now that we have our torso instance, we're going to go ahead, turn on these change flags. We're going to go back into our textures. We're going to find our torso color. With this selected in the content browser, all we have to do is hit the arrow and then we'll place the texture. Go to our metallic, do the same. Go to our normal map, do the same. Go to our roughness texture and do the same. And so now, if we go back to our mesh and we find where our torso is supposed to be here, and make sure we have our torso material instance selected here, go ahead and do the same, hit the arrow there. It's going to take a second while it updates. And then now we have our textured chest piece that is a descendant of our head material instance, which is a descendant from our master material. And so you go, okay, that's great, but you know, we're not changing colors, we're not doing anything kind of cool yet, so let's go ahead and add an emissive quality to this material. So I'm going to create a Fresnel effect. Think of this Fresnel effect as Lightwave's fast Fresnel. It's not like the most accurate of Fresnels. Also kind of think of it as like an instance angle gradient, but not as powerful. It will only do white to black, so to speak. But we'll also get to see a feature in the material editor that kind of lets you preview from any point in your node chain. So let's go ahead and hold down the M key, click, and we'll get a multiply node. Plug that in there. Hold down 3 to get a 3 color or 3 vector node, which essentially allows you to make color. By default, it's going to be black, but let's go ahead and like make it orange. Hit OK. It's going to take a second for that to update. All right, then we're going to hold down 1 to get a constant. This is similar to Lightwave scalar constants. It's basically just a float value. These are just 3 different float values brought together. We're going to hold down M again and click to get another multiply node. Plug that in there. Plug that in there. And we're going to set that to 1. And then we're going to plug this into our emissive color. So it's essentially luminosity. We're adding luminosity here. All right, and you see now it's got, it's gotten much brighter. You can see somewhat of the gradient effect, but let's just isolate just this string of nodes. So we're going to right click on this multiply node and we're going to select start previewing node. And it's just going to be an unlit version of whatever is up this chain from here. All right. So you can see it's not going to black, and for this case, I want it to go to black, right? All right, so we're gonna go ahead and select our Fresnel node, and we're gonna select our base reflect fraction, and I'm just gonna set that to 0. All right, and so now, we start off, being at full color, and then go to black. Now, say I want to control this Fresnel effect within the material instance, so we're going to go ahead and create float values that control each of these 2 settings. We're not really going to worry about normal for now. And we're going to give them their default values. The default for that's 5, and we're going to leave that at 0 as the default value because that's my preferred. Just like before, we're going to go right click on these, convert to parameter, and convert to parameter. And we're just going to call this expo. We're going to give it a group name. We're going to call this Fresnel. Because that's a long series of words, I'm just going to shorten it to BRF. And we're going to, from this drop down, we're going to select the Fresnel group. This is color, and again, Fresnel group. And we're just going to call this emissive and for that work. Okay. So, and then we're just going to go ahead and hit apply. And we're going to stop previewing that node so that we can just see the shader for what it looks like. Now that's applied, you can see that this Fresnel emissive effect is showing up here. And if we go to the robot head material instance, you can see that now we have a new group that's Fresnel, and that we have the ability to make these changes here. So let's go ahead and adjust our multiplier, and you're going to see that this happens in real time. This is really cool because this is also how you do things like material changes over time. We can also affect our Fresnel exponential here. Just kind of tighten it up, or kind of soften it out, or whatever you want to do. And you could also use this to create more complex effects and stuff like that. All right, and you can see that because these are tied together, the descendant material also takes on those properties. But what if you don't want it to take on those properties? Say, I want it to have like the rest of the look, but I want to change the color. So maybe let's make that blue. And now we can make that blue, go back and say, well, I don't really like the however the the intensity was set up previously, and that will still inherit those particular properties. I can change this color up here. Let's make it green, but because I overrode it in the child, it doesn't necessarily pick up unless I go back and disable that. And so because it's a hierarchy, you can have multiple groups of hierarchy. Say you have like, the same master material for like this whole like, rocks and stumps and, other kind of like doodads that are along the ground that don't have like things like transparency in it, so they can all inherit from like the same master material. You can have a hierarchy that's just for rocks. And then you have a sub-hierarchy that's just for a particular rock, and another particular rock, another particular rock, all right? And then you have a different hierarchy that's just for, like, different types of wood. You know what I'm saying? And so you can adjust all these different properties depending on, all the different things that you might want. Same thing with, like, leaves. You can have different types of leaves with different types of, light transmittance depending on, like, how thick you want it to be or whatever. What I'm saying? So, there's a lot of different control here, and anytime you want to go and add features to everything, you can go ahead and do that by jumping back to the master material. Now, this is not a concept that exists within Lightwave. It's actually one that I really want Lightwave to take on, because I think it's a brilliant feature. Granted, depending on how it's organized within the application. Another thing that is really great within Unreal Engine is that if you hit C with the selection, it brings up a comment. So this is going to be our emissive sets of nodes. And you could have things like texture, or if you're doing something, one of the things I like to do is I like to create controls for adjusting my normal map intensity. So what I could do here is what is it called? I think it's like a component mask. There you go. All right, so I can take my normals. I could also pull it from here to make it easier. But I can also use a component mask to just look at my different channels in here. Alright, and then I want to create another constant value. By default, we're going to make it set to 1. And we're going to create 2 multiply nodes. Drag each one of those into the top. Drag a line from here, drag into that, and then we're going to create what's called an append vector node. And essentially what this does is allows us to repack our texture. So this would be red channel, green channel, and if we create another one, copy and paste, it then allows us to add our blue channel back in. We're going to give that a 1. And then we're going to plug that into our normal channel. Now, we don't have to use these component masks, but I did want to show them, just kind of, you know, highlight the fact that we're there. Usually I bypass them and just, you know, drag these things off of here, but now, if we go ahead and convert this to a parameter, we're going to call this normal intensity. Hopefully I spelled that right. And we'll just give it a group normal. Hit apply. Let's go ahead and jump into our torso. See, also when you hit apply, it then has to reapply to all that stuff. So under our normal intensity here, we're on our torso, and let's override that color, and we'll probably bring down its intensity multiplier to 0 just for now on that brightness there. Oops. Just so that we can see what we're doing here. Alright, so now if I just kind of drag this up, say, hey, look, my normal map's going crazy, or I want to invert it, or whatever, you can do that all within here, and again, it all happens in real time. Another use case for these types of things are things like, oh, I want to have progressive damage. Maybe I'm doing an Unreal Engine version of Battlestar Galactica, and I've got like 50 Vipers, and I want to have like custom battle damage or progressive battle damage. I should say, and or progressive battle damage on all the Vipers or on the Galactica itself. You know, using a material instance would allow you to sit there and dial it in. Maybe you're doing a game, maybe you're doing a TV show or whatever. You could literally use that, so as you know, time progresses, you know, more and more age and all that kind of stuff happens, and you know, instead of having to just swap out the model that has a different, you know, texture applied to it, or swap out the material, you could go in there and dial that in. You could also potentially set up your material so that you could have, you know, dynamic damage happening as well. And because that would have to be in part a code execution, you'd have to use a material instance in order to access those variables, in order to make those changes through your code. So that's going to be it for this video. I want to thank you all for watching. Again, please like the video and subscribe to the channel on YouTube. If you guys have any specific requests for a video, whether it has to do with materials or anything else, please let me know. I will see if I can accommodate that. The next video is going to focus on blueprints, and we're going to talk a little bit about executing code, doing some parenting, like hierarchy type stuff, for creating kind of like prefab stuff that you might want to use, you know, over and over and over again. Again, this is one of those things that I want to do for this series specifically because it's not something that has an analog in Lightwave, and it's something that you know, people, you know, might bring stuff into Unreal Engine. You know, say it's, you know, a character that has a flashlight, or a spaceship with a light rig, or, you know, a visual effects like engine effects rig or something like that. You know, this is how you would set that up within Unreal Engine. So that's going to be the next video. It's not going to be specifically on that, you know, like doing an effects rig, because that's kind of complicated for a short video. But it will kind of give you guys a taste for what is possible within Unreal Engine that is not necessarily very easy to do within Lightwave. So again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.